In the 1920s, Berlin was the absolute center of the modern world. It was a city of jazz, neon lights, and radical freedom. And right at the heart of it stood a grand building, the Institute for Sexual Science. Inside its walls, a brilliant doctor named Magnus Hirschfeld was doing something revolutionary. He was issuing official medical certificates to transgender people, protecting them from police arrest for simply dressing as their true selves. For a brief moment in history, a vulnerable community finally felt safe. They had doctors, they had passports, they had a home, but history can turn on a dime. In 1933, the shadows took over. The Nazi Party seized absolute control of Germany, and their very first target wasn't a military base or a political rival. It was that grand building in Berlin. On a grey May morning, trucks roared to a halt outside the Institute. Hundreds of Nazi youth and soldiers stormed the doors. They smashed the laboratories. They ripped down the archives. And out in the public square, they built a massive bonfire. Tens of thousands of medical records, life-saving research books, and personal histories went up in smoke. In a single afternoon, the regime didn't just outlaw trans people, they attempted to erase the very proof that they had ever existed. Once the books were burned, the trap snapped shut. The regime weaponized the law. They took an old statute called Paragraph 1 of 75 and twisted it into a dragnet. To the dictatorship, anyone who didn't fit their rigid, hypermasculine or submissive feminine boxes was viewed as a disease threatening the purity of the Reich. The secret police, the Gestapo, began compiling lists. They shut down the cafes, the theatre troupes, and the support networks. If you were trans, the world became a minefield overnight. Thousands were swept up in night raids. They weren't given trials. They were loaded onto trains and sent into the absolute horror of the concentration camps. Once inside those fences, survival became a brutal numbers game. Prisoners were marked by coloured fabric triangles sewn onto their jackets. Transgender women were often forced to wear the pink triangle, marking them as homosexuals. Others were branded with the black triangle, labelling them as asocial, a catch-all term for anyone the state deemed broken or worthless. Behind those barbed wire walls, they faced the worst of human cruelty. The guards singled them out for targeted abuse. Worse still, Nazi doctors viewed them as lab rats, subjecting them to horrific medical experimentation and forced surgeries under the guise of curing their biology. On paper, the system was designed to crush their spirit, then their bodies, and wipe them out completely. But the regime underestimated one thing: the sheer, unbreakable will of the human spirit to survive. When the world turned into a nightmare, the community went underground. They realized that if they wanted to live, they had to beat the dictators at their own bureaucratic game. Survival meant mastering the art of the disguise. Many trans individuals made the heartbreaking decision to destroy their own transition records. They buried their true identities, changed their clothes, and forced themselves back into the script of their assigned sex at birth. They became ghosts in plain sight, blending into the background of a terrifying society just to keep breathing. Others took even greater risks. They fled their hometowns, heading to massive cities where no one knew their pasts. Under the cover of darkness, a silent, invisible network of mutual aid began to form. People traded forged identity papers, altering birth certificates and passports to create entirely fake lives under the radar of the Gestapo. Whispers were passed through trusted friends. Avoid that neighborhood. The police are checking papers at the train station. Burn your letters. They didn't have weapons, and they didn't have an army. Their resistance was simply staying alive. But you couldn't survive entirely alone. It required accomplices, the protectors. In a totalitarian state, paranoia is the currency. The Gestapo relied on ordinary citizens turning on each other. Neighbors spied on neighbors. Shopkeepers watched their customers. To hide a targeted person was to invite a death sentence into your own home. Yet some people still chose to act. Landlords hid tenants in secret rooms. Friends swore to false alibis when the secret police came knocking. Forgers risked their lives in damp basements, crafting the paperwork that meant the difference between life and a concentration camp. The consequences for these protectors were absolute. If the Gestapo discovered you were hiding a trans person, you were labelled a traitor to the Reich. There were no warnings. Protectors were immediately arrested, dragged into brutal interrogations, and thrown into the very same camps alongside the people they tried to save. Many paid the ultimate price for their humanity. The Nazi regime built a massive, terrifying machine designed to completely destroy an entire community. They burned the science, they weaponized the laws, and they locked people away in the dark. They thought they won. They thought they had written the final script. But they failed, because despite the camps, despite the Gestapo, and despite the betrayals, people survived. The stories stayed alive in the shadows, passed down until they could finally be told out in the open. They tried to erase an entire history, but in the end, the regime crumbled into dust, and the truth remains.